Hello everyone and welcome to 1104 Introduction to Biology 2. In this presentation, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction to the class, and then we're going to jump right into the material in Chapter 10. So a little bit of information about me. I know this class is virtual, but I would like for you guys to get to know me, and I would also like to get to know you. So some basic information about me. My name is Mariah Campbell. I'll be your instructor for this semester. I did both my undergraduate and graduate studies at Georgia State, so I'm very familiar with Georgia State and the classes and the culture of the university. My graduate research centered on the antimicrobial and antibiofilm activities of plant-derived compounds, and I actually completed my dissertation in July of this year. So I'm very new, fresh out of grad school, but I'm very, very excited for this opportunity to teach you guys and be your instructor this semester. I have a lot of hobbies and interests, some of which are traveling. I love going anywhere, everywhere, anything new. I love to experience that. I love learning new languages. I studied Spanish in school. Spanish is not so good anymore, but I did study Spanish. I taught myself Japanese, and I'm currently learning Chinese, Mandarin. I love to sew and create things, and I love trying new foods. I'll try almost any new food. There are some dietary restrictions I have, but mostly I love trying new things. The most important thing about myself is how to contact me. My email address is mcampbell29@gsu.edu, so that is the email address that you can use to contact me. The syllabus for this course is made available on iCollege under the Contents tab, and if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and read through the syllabus and make sure you understand every component of the syllabus. I'm going to take a little bit of time just to go through some key points of the syllabus here, but this is not all the information, so please do go and read it. There is a syllabus quiz that I'm asking you to complete, and it's due August 31st at 11:59 p.m. Additionally, another early assessment we have for this class is a pre-course survey. And this survey is just to allow me to get to know you, to get to know your history, to get to know what you plan for your future, and also kind of what you expect from this class. And this survey is really important to me because it allows me to not only just get more familiar with you guys, but also to understand what you expect from this class so that I can kind of guide this semester as well as following semesters going forward. So please fill out the pre-course survey and submit that on iCollege. During the semester, we'll also have 13 weekly quizzes. These are due every Friday at 11:59 p.m. and there are also 4 exams, and these will be due at 11:59 p.m. on Sundays. You also have sporadic assignments throughout the semester related to kind of what we're studying at that time. And there's a post-course survey. The post-course survey is also very important as it allows you to give me some feedback on your honest opinion on the course, and it lets me become a better instructor and evolve and do better in next semesters and in the following semesters. So please do fill out the post-course survey at the end of the semester and be open and honest and constructive with your criticism. Additionally, there will be an extra credit opportunity in this course, and if you want more information regarding that, please see the syllabus. In this course, iCollege will be crucial, okay? iCollege is the main way that I'm able to connect with you and update you on anything that's changed regarding our schedule. So please check iCollege daily, at least once a day. I will not be accepting late assignments this semester, so please turn all your things in on time. This course is virtual. So we will not be interacting in person. However, I don't want it to be so disconnected and separated. I would like for us to interact with one another in a virtual capacity. So you can interact with me, of course, via the office hours and things like that and via appointments, but also interact with each other. So you can connect using whatever virtual platform you would like, GroupMe, WeChat, Zoom, WebEx, whatever have you. Go ahead and use it to connect with your fellow classmates so that you can study together and kind of build those connections and community. Even though we're virtual, doesn't mean you have to be isolated. Also, a really key point with this being said, this class is virtual. However, you still have you are still held up to the academic honesty policies. So do not share or accept any information pertaining to course quizzes or exams in this course. Okay, academic dishonesty is taken very seriously at the university and is taken very seriously in this course. So please behave professionally, but also keep yourselves honest. So how do you succeed in this class? Numero uno, study, 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 okay? This is going to require a lot of self-discipline and time management on your part to make sure that you're studying for this class and really understanding the material, okay? Read the PowerPoints and the textbook, okay? I recommend reviewing the PowerPoints first, and because they allow you to, they act as a guide for what I find to be most crucial for reading in the textbook for that chapter, okay? I do recommend reading through the entire textbook chapters. However, if you want to know exactly where the focus of the material that I think is most critical is, you can find that in the PowerPoints. At the end of each PowerPoint, you'll find a reading and resources section, and that also lists kind of what sections of the textbook I recommend you read. It'll also include any assignments or assessments and additional resources that I find interesting. I tend to be a huge advocate of YouTube, so I'll a lot of times put videos in there that might be interesting or helpful or that I just thought were cool related to that topic. Take good notes. If you haven't learned how to take good notes yet, please reach out, please practice. Good notes is going to help you not only in this course, but in all of your courses, so take good notes. Participate and interact. As I mentioned, this class is virtual, it is asynchronous. However, I do want you to interact with each other and make those connections. So you can do this with me and with your fellow students in the virtual office hours. My office hours, I intend on them to be kind of like an open discussion section. So there are opportunities for you to get your questions answered, but they're also an opportunity for you to discuss topics and things with your fellow classmates and also to connect with them, okay? Ask for help early, okay? If you're struggling, do not wait till the end of the semester or wait until you feel like you're drowning in material and you just can't take it anymore to ask for help, okay? If you need help understanding a concept or you're like, okay, I need some clarification, ask for help early when you need it. Don't wait to ask for help late, because by then it's too late. Complete all assessments on time, okay? I will not be accepting late assessments. So if you decide not to turn something in on time, you've just left points on the table unnecessarily. So turn in your assessments in a timely manner. All right, with that said, we're going to move into our actual content for the first batch of content for this week, which is chapter 10, talking about evolution and natural selection. So what is evolution? Evolution is any change in allelic frequency in a population over time, okay? What are alleles? That might be something that you may remember from 1103, you may not remember, but alleles are variants of a particular trait. So for example, brown eyes versus blue eyes, or blonde hair versus red hair, right? These are the same gene, they're just different variations in that gene that gives you a particular trait. So this image here is showing you there are two chromosomes. There are two chromosomes, let's say one that comes from mom and one that comes from dad, and each of them have a trait on them. In this case, there's an allele for codes for purple flowers and an allele that codes for white flowers. So they're both the same trait, but there's just variation within that trait. The evolution is a change in the percentage of individuals that possess a particular version of that allele, okay? So in a population of humans, out of 100 people, you might have 80% have brown hair, right? And I say 20% have blonde hair, just to keep the example simple. If all of a sudden 15 people with brown hair leave our population, Now the percentage of those with blonde hair, relative percentage has increased, and the relative percentage of people with brown hair has decreased. And so that population has now evolved. Same thing if 10 children are born with blonde hair, now the percentage of blonde hair traits in that population has increased, and the relative to the population, and the percentage of brown hair has decreased. So that population has now evolved. A change in the population can be large or can be small. In both cases, its evolution has occurred. So a population, I've mentioned this word several times already, but I probably should have defined it first. But a population is a group of organisms that are living in a specific region, so then within the same region, that are capable of breeding with one another. So they're all the same species of an organism living within a particular region. Populations evolve, not individuals. So that is a common misconception that people have, is that, oh, I have a mutation in my gene, I have evolved. No, individuals do not evolve. Populations evolve. So we have some major founders to thank for our theory of evolution, two of which are Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace. And we won't give too much time talking about them, but I do recommend, if you're interested, especially in history and biological history, to read their section in the textbook. But I consider them both to be fathers of evolution by natural selection. Okay, so there are many ways of evolution, and we're going to talk about them, but they were really the fathers of natural selection, the concept here. And both of them came up with the similar idea and concept of natural selection independently. And both of them are good examples of the fact that science does not happen in a vacuum. Okay, this is a term that I heard a lot when I was going through my undergrad schools, and it's very, very true. Science rarely, if ever, happens where one person is able to execute everything on their own from start to finish. Okay, both Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace consulted with other scientists, experts, and academics, and shared their ideas and got input from other people to help formulate their concept of natural selection. So science doesn't happen in a vacuum. Rarely does any progress happen in a vacuum. So keep that in mind as you're going through your careers. And there was evidence at the time for the concept of natural selection, and it's been expanded upon, and even more evidence has been found since their time to support evolution by natural selection. So, like I mentioned, there are multiple ways that that you can get evolution, not just natural selection, and we will kind of go through each of those independently. There are 4 mechanisms: mutation, migration, genetic drift, and natural selection. The first mechanism of evolution we're going to talk about is mutation. Mutation is the alteration in the DNA base pair sequence, and this can occur via errors when copying DNA, but it can also be a result of exposure to UV light or mutagens. And mutagens are chemical compounds that will bind to DNA and change the structure of that DNA. Mutations are random and unpredictable, and generally, if a mutation occurs in the gametes, it is passed on to their offspring. As long as it's not a lethal mutation, it'll be passed on, and that offspring will have that trait. All variation in life comes from mutation. The next mechanism of evolution we're going to talk about is migration. And the migration is the movement of individuals from one population to another within the same species. So we're going to use the images below as an example. So let's say we have two distinct populations of buffalo that are separated by a mountain range, okay? And in population A, approximately 70% of our buffalo have the trait that codes for dark brown fur or dark brown hair, and 30% possess the trait that is light brown hair. However, our second population that's on the right side of the mountain range, 90% of their population express the trait for dark brown hair, and only 10% have the trait for light brown hair. If a subsection of population A then migrates to population B, the percentage of each allele being expressed has subsequently changed. So both populations have now evolved. The migrants that came from population A and population B, because they're from the same species, if they can reproduce, it also produces offspring that will continue to evolve those populations, right? So you would expect that because a decent portion of the migrants had the light brown gene, if they migrate over to population 2 and reproduce with population 2, might see a continued growth in the percentage of light brown buffalo. That's very real possible. Might not, but very possible. And in the case of migration, as I mentioned before, both populations have now evolved because their allelic frequencies have changed. The percentage of light fur in population 1 has decreased now from what it was before, and the population of light brown fur in population 2 has increased relative to what it was before. The third mechanism of evolution we'll talk about is genetic drift. And genetic drift is a random change in allelic frequency in a population. This is unrelated to reproductive success or whatever specific traits you have. These are generally indiscriminate events that occur that will affect all members of the population evenly. So you have two forms of genetic drift that we will talk about. First is the founder effect, and this is the change in allelic frequency when a small group breaks away from the large population and starts their own community. So if we go back to the previous example, I'm going to try to draw something similar here. Let's say we had a pie chart, and within that pie chart, we had 75% of frogs were green and 25% were blue. Okay. If a small subset of this population of frogs, let's say this group here, were to leave and start their own population, we might see something like 50-50. Because the resulting population is based on the traits that were expressed from the parent group that broke off. So if that parent group was approximately 50% green frogs and 50% blue frogs, then the new population that resulted from that founding group will have 50% green frogs, 50% blue frogs. And that means evolution has occurred. That new group is distinctly different in its allelic frequency from the parent group. We also have the bottleneck effect. The bottleneck effect is when a catastrophic event leaves only a small subsection of the original population alive. So if we go back to our frog example, if that small carrot, of individuals here, let's say instead of them being a group that broke off and went somewhere else, let's say they were the only surviving individuals after, let's say, a virus that kills off frogs, blue and green frogs indiscriminately. In this case, after some time, those immune frogs will, of course, reproduce, and their population will grow in size, and the allelic frequency of blue to green of this new population, which is represented here, is distinctly different from the allelic frequency present in the parent group. The changes and evolution that occurs via genetic drift is most impactful on small groups, because as you can imagine, if you have a small group and there are changes, those changes are far more drastic and dramatic than if you have a large group and a change is made. Because if there's a large group, there's more potential for certain traits to be expressed that will kind of make up for that difference, make up for that loss. And one interesting thing about genetic drift is it can lead to fixation in a population. So it can drastically change the dynamics, but it can lead to the loss of certain alleles altogether. So let's say we had an event, a bottleneck effect event, and it killed off all of the blue frogs. All of a sudden, and only left a small percentage of green frogs left. Now, all of a sudden, we have only green frogs. There are no more blue frogs. So when you have fixation, you have 100% of one trait being expressed, and then of one allele being expressed, and 0% of the other. So now we would have 100% green frogs and 0% blue frogs, because all the blue frogs are gone. And these images here, I think, are really good examples of showing the founder effect and the bottleneck effect, and how they can change the diversity and the allelic frequency within a population. The last mechanism of evolution we'll talk about is natural selection. And natural selection is based on the concept that individuals with a version of a trait that is advantageous will produce more offspring than those with different traits. Natural selection is by far one of the most specific forms of evolution because 3 conditions must be met. First is that there must be variation within a trait. So if you look at the image to the right, we have 3 types of bunnies. We've got bunnies that have a trait that allows them to be faster, bunnies that have a trait that makes them kind of slower, and bunnies that have the version of the trait that kind of gives them medium speed, right? So in this case, there are 3 versions of the trait: fast, medium speed, and slow. There has to be heritability. So the trait has to be passed on to offspring. So it has to be present in the gametes, right? So the slow rabbit will pass on traits of being slow to its offspring, and the fast rabbit will pass on the version of the trait that allows them to be faster to their offspring, and same thing with the medium speed rabbit. And the final condition that must be met is differential reproductive success. So one version of the trait, or some versions of the trait, have to result in that organism being able to produce more offspring than individuals that express a different version of that trait. So looking at these rabbits, the rabbit that has the version of the trait that makes them slow, and the rabbit that has the version of the trait that makes them kind of medium speed, will more likely be prey to the fox, right? So we can see that in predation, the fox is more likely to catch and eat the slow and the medium speed rabbit. So those rabbits are less likely to have opportunities to reproduce, right? Because if you're dead, you can't reproduce. But the rabbit that has the version of the trait that makes them fast has a better chance of surviving predation, which means they have a better chance of having offspring and having more offspring than the rabbits that code for versions of the trait that make them slow or medium speed. So one common misconception is that evolution is natural selection. That is not true. Natural selection is one form of evolution, but we have just talked about 3 other mechanisms by which evolution can occur. Natural selection is just one of these mechanisms. So we're going to talk about fitness, okay? We have all heard the survival of the fittest mantra, but it's one of the most misunderstood concepts out there, okay? So fitness is not based on how strong you are, how fast you are, how healthy you are. It's solely based on your reproductive success. How successful are you at passing on your genetic traits? Are you able to reproduce? How much are you able to reproduce? Okay. Fitness is a measure of reproductive success relative to others in the population with different phenotypes, right? So if we go back to that rabbit example, the rabbits that are fast are more likely more fit for their environment because they're able to live long enough to produce more offspring, right? So if all those, the green, the blue, and the yellow rabbits, if they all can produce litters of 4, but the yellow and the And the green rabbits that were medium and slow speed only reproduce once and have a litter of 4, versus the blue rabbits that were much faster are able to survive and have 3 or 4 litters of 4. They have 16 offspring, so they were far more fit, right? The blue rabbits are more fit. They experience more reproductive success. As I mentioned, fitness is not defined by an individual's survival, physical strength, or health. All these factors can contribute to your fitness. However, that is not what fitness is. An example of why fitness is not based on survival or anything like that is if you are an animal and you live to be much older than most. So let's say you're a human being and you live to be 110, right? You've lived a long life. However, your fitness is considered to be 0 if you had no children, whereas someone who was able to reproduce and have 26 kids and they died at, I don't know, 40, which would be a lot of children. But if that happened, then they would be considered to be more fit than you because it's all based on reproductive success, right? And organisms' fitness can change based on their habitat and the conditions of their environment, right? So if you are a white bunny rabbit in the Arctic, you're probably more fit than a brown bunny rabbit in the Arctic, right? Because if you're a white bunny rabbit, you're more able to be camouflaged. That means you're less likely to probably be eaten by a predator, and you have a better chance at reproducing and producing offspring than a brown rabbit in the Arctic that is more easily seen. Now, if you flip the roles and now those 2 rabbits are put in the woods, that white rabbit might be at a disadvantage. Now in the woods, that white rabbit is not the most fit anymore. Now the brown rabbit is most fit because the environmental conditions have changed, and it being camouflaged with the brown soil in the forest makes it better able to potentially make it better able to survive and have more offspring than the white rabbit. This change in fitness due to changes in condition is the reason why we don't have perfect organisms, right? As we all know, conditions on Earth are always changing, and what might be the best organism, the perfect organism for one environment is not the perfect organism for another. Or if something changes in that environment, it's no longer the perfect organism if the traits no longer give it the advantage that it had that made them more fit before. So a concept of natural selection, what we just talked about, was adaptation, and here are my brown and white bunnies. Adaptation is the process by which a population's organisms become better suited for their environment, and this is a result of natural selection. So as you can imagine, there will probably be more and more and more white bunny rabbits within the population over time as the white bunny rabbits are able to avoid predation more than the brown bunnies. And like I mentioned, this is a result of natural selection. There are several ways that natural selection can change the dynamics in a population. The first we're going to talk about is through directional selection. And this is where one extreme of a trait is selected for heavily over any other version of that trait. So let's say we have an example of our rabbits with our speed, right? So we have a variety of traits that will dictate how fast a rabbit is. We have on one extreme, though, very, very slow rabbits, and then we have a range in the middle that represent kind of not so very, very slow, but not fast either. So they're kind of more of the intermediate rabbits. And then we have our very, very fast rabbit, which is our other extreme. In directional selection, you're really favoring one of those extremes, either the very, very slow or the very, very fast rabbit, but not both extremes, just one or the other. And this will cause the population to begin to shift to favor only one of those traits. So as time goes on, let's say the fast rabbit is favored, you'll see more and more and more faster rabbits. And you'll see fewer and fewer and fewer slow rabbits. And this is because they're not being selected for, right? If you're a slower rabbit, you're not producing as many offspring. If you're a faster rabbit, you're producing more and more offspring, so the population begins to represent faster and faster rabbits. Also, in directional selection, you will see a decrease in the unselected for traits, and on the other extreme, it can even be to the extent that that trait completely disappears from the population. We also have our stabilizing selection, and this is where individuals that have the medium version of a trait are selected for. So this is when it's advantageous not to have at one of those two extremes. It's more advantageous to be in the middle. And so in the book, they use an example of human babies and birth weight. So human babies that are too small have a lower percent chance of survival, and babies also that are too large have a lower percent chance of survival. But babies that are right there in the middle, that experience that have the intermediate trait, so they're not really big babies, not really big small babies, have a better chance of survival. So you'll start to see that the intermediate trait is preferred, and more of the organisms will express that medium intermediate trait than either of the extremes. The final one we have is disruptive selection, and this is where individuals at both extremes are favored over those with the intermediate trait. So if we had our rabbits as an example again, let's say that the fast and the very slow rabbits were both selected for. There were advantages to being either one of these rabbits, but if you were in an intermediate speed rabbit, you were selected against, right? Because you had a less chance of reproducing and less chance of survival. So for whatever reason, the organisms at both ends of the extremes of the trait are selected for. And so you'll see a curve that kind of says one extreme, there's a high population of people who have one extreme of the trait, and then it'll decrease at the intermediate, and a high population again of individuals that express the complete opposite extreme of the trait. One common misconception is that evolution is an unsupported theory, and this is not true. We find evidence of evolution all around us, and we can even see it happening in real time in front of our faces. One way we can see evolution is through looking at the fossil record. So we find fossils all the time, and fossils allow us to kind of reconstruct what organisms used to look like long ago. And through that reconstruction, we can actually start to see how organisms from the past relate to organisms today and find common ancestors and kind of branching points for organisms that we see today and through their ancestors. We can see how organisms evolved over time. Another evidence for evolution is biogeography. So if you compare organisms that live in various areas around the world and compare their similarities and differences, you can actually start to see how organisms evolved. So in this example from the book, you're looking at similar ecosystems in two different places. So I think they looked in the United States, and they also looked in Australia. When you look at Australia, the organisms that are there are far more similar to each other than they are to their counterparts in America, right? Because even though they lived in similar environments, they are more similar to each other than they are, due to evolution, than they are to organisms in very similar environments far away in different places. We can also use comparative anatomy and embryology to see how organisms evolved. You can see how various embryos from organisms that have a spinal cord, so various chordates, have similar stages in reproduction, where even embryos are almost indistinguishable from one another, but they're from two completely different species. So looking at this can give us a clue into our evolutionary history of various animals around the world, but also can show us, maybe there's some common ancestors and where those common ancestors might be in the timeline. We can also use molecular biology to look at relatedness. DNA is highly conserved, and there are minor differences here and there. So when you look at the similarities and differences between genetic sequences, you can start to map out kind of how organisms are related to each other and how they evolved over time, and kind of putting that picture together. You can also see evolution happen in real time. So I was a microbiologist. Have been able to view, like in this image here, the evolution of a bacteria over time, because they grow very, very quickly. But you can also see animals evolve and plants and things evolve in the lab or in the field, and you can see how they change. So you can see evolution in real time. With that said, that concludes our first lecture on evolution, as well as our introduction to this course. I will go ahead and recommend you start reading Chapter 10, Sections 1, Sections 5 through 9, Sections 11, 12, and 15 as your focus. Also doing the learning curve assignment for this section. Have a good day.